History has preserved this woman's name, yet it has cleaved her image in two, as if by the strike of a battle axe. One chronicle paints the portrait of a heroic Valkyrie, a bared breast, a sword in her hand, an icy determination, a pregnant woman who single-handedly turns an army of natives to flight, saving the men who had faltered. Another chronicle reveals a cold-blooded executioner, someone who personally slaughtered 5 defenseless female captives when even hardened warriors refused to dirty their hands. Freydis Eiriksdottir, daughter of Erik the Red, sister of Leif the Lucky. How could one personality contain both a savior and a monster? The answer lies in the bad blood boiling in her veins. She embodied the true nature of her father, inheriting his unrestrained fury, yet remaining devoid of his wisdom. Today we conclude the saga of the great Viking discoveries. The heroes of past sagas have already blazed their trails. Floki discovered Iceland through pain. Erik the Red built Greenland on a foundation of lies, and Thorfinn unsuccessfully tried to negotiate with the New World over a vat of milk. Freydis chooses a different path. She will take what is hers by force. In this episode, why the conquerors of the oceans ultimately lost to themselves, how greed and a dispute over a single ship destroyed a flourishing colony on an entire continent, and why Leif Erikson, upon learning the truth, cursed his own kin, dooming his sister to a fate worse than death. This is a story of power without morality, slipping through one's fingers. A story of how the Scandinavian dream was shattered not by enemy arrows, but by betrayal within their own home. We return to Greenland, to the place where, in the shadow of great names, a conspiracy is ripening that will close the gates to the New World forever. This is the bloody sunset of Vinland. The year is 1011. Greenland is drowning in silence and envy. After the triumphant return of Thorfinn Karlsefni, a heavy hangover hangs over the settlement at Brattahlid. The people watched as the holds of his ships burst with Vinland timber and precious furs. They remembered how the merchant exchanged deadly risk for fabulous wealth and departed for Iceland to meet old age in satiety. Those who remained were left only with the whistle of the Arctic wind, the smell of burning peat, and the bitterness of missed chances. Living at the epicenter of this suffocating need is a woman with molten lava pulsing through her veins, Freydis Eiriksdottir, heiress to the Greenlandic kings. The social status of this woman seems paradoxical and humiliating. She bears the loud name of the discoverers, but in fact owns nothing but furious ambitions. Freydis's husband, Thorvard, possesses means, but in the world of Vikings, strength and charisma are valued above all, so he is regarded as a non-entity. His wife despises him, seeing in him not a comrade in arms, but merely a purse, a resource that is convenient to use, but shameful to display. She watches as the fame of her father and brother turns into myth, while her own life rots in the shadow of their greatness. Freydis craves not just gold, she needs status. The woman demands revenge against a fate that endowed her with a great surname, but deprived her of real power. At this moment, 2 ships enter Eriksfjord. Guests from Norway promise change. The longships are commanded by Icelanders, Helgi and Finnbogi. These experienced merchants, honest and pragmatic, are accustomed to harsh maritime laws, but prove completely unprepared for female treachery. The brothers have brought goods and planned to winter in Greenland, intending to turn for home with the spring. However, the Mistress sees them not as guests, but as lawful prey. She comes to the brothers with an idea that, in conditions of resource scarcity, is impossible to dismiss. Freydis calls on them to join forces for a voyage to Vinland. The plan looks flawless. The Icelanders provide their large ship and expertise. She guarantees knowledge of the route, the influence of the Erikson clan, and access to Leif's buildings in America. The profit from timber and furs is to be divided equally. Helgi and Finnbogi shake hands on it, believing they have concluded a profitable deal with the chieftain's daughter. The sailors do not suspect. This contract is their death warrant. Freydis immediately rushes to her brother. She demands that Leif gift her his houses in Vinland, but he, as if sensing trouble, answers evasively. He is ready to lend the dwellings, but not to transfer ownership. Even such a cold reception doesn't dampen her ardor. The main thing has been obtained: permission to act. Preparation starts. The agreement with the brothers is crystal clear. Each side takes 30 warriors on board, not counting women. Such parity guarantees security and honest labor, but Freydis plans to play with a marked deck from the very beginning. Secret from her partners, under the cover of night, she sneaks 5 extra fighters onto her longship. Appreciate this detail. Just 5 men. In the scale of an army, a trifle, but in the confined space of an expedition, where every blade counts, such an imbalance turns an alliance into a dictatorship. This is not protection against Indians, but a prearranged instrument for an internal coup. As the shores of Greenland disappear beyond the horizon, Helgi and Finnbogi look forward with hope. They dream of the wealth of the new world. However, Freydis stares at their backs. In her mind, a script has already matured where there is no room for dividing the loot, nor for the brothers themselves. The voyage, intended to restore greatness to the Vikings, is poisoned by betrayal from day one. The ocean hides the truth. On one of the ships, the balance of power has already shifted toward death. The ships slice through the coastal waves of Vinland. A fair wind fills the sails, and the eyes of the travelers are met with that very paradise they dreamed of in cold Greenland. Meadows that know no winter withering, rivers boiling with salmon, and most importantly, endless forests stretching beyond the horizon. The brothers Helgi and Finnbogi arrive in the harbor first. Faithful to the spirit of partnership, they move their supplies into Leif's Budir, the very dwellings once erected by Leif the Lucky. The seafarers consider themselves full participants in the expedition and believe the roof over their heads is common property. But the moment Freydis's longship enters the bay, the illusion of unity crumbles to dust. Erik the Red's daughter steps onto the sand not as a guest, but as an imperious mistress catching thieves in her abode. She issues an ultimatum demanding they clear the buildings. The brothers are struck dumb. They appeal to the agreement. We believed we were sharing everything equally. Freydis's answer strikes like a whip. Leif lent these walls to me, not to you. It is here that the first crack appears. Finnbogi, the elder brother, speaks words that the sagas have preserved through the centuries. Looking into this woman's eyes, he throws down, "We cannot match you in wickedness, Freydis." The Scandinavians do not draw their swords. They are merchants, not executioners. Gathering their belongings, the men walk away. Think about the scale of this pettiness. Before the Vikings lies an entire continent, the immense North America, capable of sheltering millions. But on a tiny patch of land, thousands of miles from civilization, people are tearing at each other's throats over 3 wooden shacks. Freydis's greed had already eclipsed the instinct for survival. The rejected brothers set up camp further away on the shore of a lake. They fell trees, erect their own sturdy camp, and try to keep a distance. The land turns out to be split. Instead of a unified citadel, two hostile camps arise on the shore, separated by an invisible wall of alienation. The icy breath of the Arctic has fettered the shores of Vinland. At first, the colonists simulate a normal life. Axes ring out, they are chopping wood, that very treasure for which they cross the ocean. The settlers even try to organize joint games, celebrating Yule. But the seeds of discord sown by Freydis have already sprouted. Sporting competitions spill over into bloody brawls. Laughter drowns in curses. Soon, communication is cut off. The path between the two camps becomes overgrown with weeds. A deathly silence hangs over the settlement. No one crosses the other's threshold anymore. Groups of Scandinavians have locked themselves in their quarters, furiously sharpening axes and peering into the thicket. But now they fear not the forest savages, but their own neighbors. Freydis has isolated the enemies. Now they are alone, and she is ready to deliver the decisive blow. To understand the motives for what happens next, time must stand still. Freydis Eiriksdottir never played by the rules of ordinary manipulators. Hidden in her past is an episode that turned Eiriksdottir into a living legend, and simultaneously into a nightmare for any man who dared stand in her way. The shadow of this woman was born long before the current slaughter, during the expedition of Thorfinn Karlsefni, which we recalled earlier. The saga of Erik the Red describes the moment when the vaunted Viking defense crumbled to dust. The native Skrælings used an unknown weapon, a hissing sphere of blue-black color that fell to the ground with a crash. Panic seized the seasoned fighters. Karlsefni and his warband, the best swords of Scandinavia, turned to flight. The warriors raced up the river, saving their lives and leaving the camp defenseless. Behind them remained only one figure. Freydis emerged from her tent. The final stages of pregnancy made her body heavy and clumsy. Physically, she could not run alongside the others, but Eiriksdottir had no intention of retreating. Seeing the backs of her kin, she threw words at them that stung more painfully than fire. "Why do you flee from such pitiful wretches, you who are capable of slaughtering them like cattle? If I had a weapon, I would fight better than any of you." The men did not hear. Terror drowned out the remnants of shame. Left alone with the advancing horde, Freydis retreats under the canopy of the forest. Underfoot, she sees the body of Thorbrand, Snorri's son. His skull has been crushed by a flat stone, a projectile of the Skrælings. And here, a transformation occurs. The woman does not fall into hysterics. She bends down and tears the naked blade from the dead hand. When the pursuers surround her, Freydis commits an act that breaks the logic of battle. She tears the clothes from herself, baring her breast, and with a wild scream, strikes it flat with the blade of the sword. Look at this image through the eyes of the indigenous inhabitants. They expected to meet a victim. Instead, they saw a red-headed fury, a pregnant demoness who summons pain and death herself, fearing neither steel nor spirits. The natives froze. In their picture of the world, such madness meant only one thing. Before them stood a creature possessed by dark forces. The Skrælings faltered. The savages rushed to their boats and hastily sailed away. A pregnant woman, all alone, won a battle that had been shamefully lost by an entire army of men. This triumph changed her psyche forever. Freydis won where the strongest warriors failed. Success bred in her an absolute, icy contempt for the male sex. Now she knew, true strength lies not in muscles, but in a will of steel. She is the only heiress of Erik the Red worthy of undivided power. Let us return to the divided camp of Vinland. Look at the brothers Helgi and Finnbogi through her eyes. Eiriksdottir sees them not as partners, but those same cowards, capable only of chopping wood and hoarding riches for her. In her distorted consciousness, they are merely prey, temporarily guarding her gold, and she is ready to take what is hers. Spring in Vinland broke open not only the rivers, but also Freydis's true intentions. Over the winter, the settlers achieved the impossible. Both camps worked to the limit of their strength, and now the shore was lined with mountains of valuable timber and bales of furs. However, here, the cold mathematics of envy came into play. The brothers Helgi and Finnbogi had succeeded more. Their haul exceeded hers in volume, and most importantly, their longship, anchored nearby, eclipsed Freydis's vessel in size and cargo capacity. Eiriksdottir realized if they set sail now, half the treasures of Vinland would leave for Iceland forever. She decided to rewrite the terms of the deal. The saga of the Greenlanders has preserved a chilling detail of this morning. Freydis rose from her bed before dawn. She threw on her husband's cloak, but, a crucial nuance, she did not put on shoes. Barefoot, through the icy dew, the woman headed toward the strangers' camp. This was not madness. Freydis was preemptively creating the image of a victim who had been attacked and fled in panic to justify future cruelty. She finds Finnbogi, who had come out to meet the sunrise. The conversation flows peacefully. Eiriksdottir plays the card of an exhausted woman, disillusioned with the harsh life. "I want to leave," she whispers, "but my ship is too small for the cargo. Let us trade vessels." Finnbogi, honest and fatally naive, sees this as a chance to end the feud. He agrees instantly. "I will do this if by so doing you find peace." Assess this moment. The brothers perform an act of ultimate generosity. They give away their best longship, naively believing they are purchasing safety. In reality, they are signing their own death warrant. Freydis returns to the house. She slides into bed next to her sleeping husband, and when her frozen, wet feet touch his body, Thorvard wakes up. And here, the performance begins. Instead of news about a successful deal, Freydis breaks into sobs. She turns reality inside out. "I went to the brothers to ask for an exchange," she lies, "but they beat me and treated me like a slave." Thorvard froze in stupor, but Freydis strikes a blow calculated to the millimeter. She aims at the ego of a weak man, eternally living in the shadow of her great ancestors. "You, miserable coward, are incapable of avenging your wife's shame. Now I see that I am no longer in Greenland, where my mighty father stood behind my back." In the finale, she throws a threat onto the scales that for a Viking was more terrible than death. "I will divorce you if you do not wash away this insult with blood." The trap has snapped shut. Thorvard is cornered. To remain silent is to become a laughingstock and lose status. To believe is to kill. Freydis's manipulation is flawless. She turned the brothers' generosity into their crime, and her husband into an obedient blade. Thorvard leaps from his couch. Demanding no proof, he rouses his loyal men and orders them to take up arms. The sun has not yet risen, and the fate of the expedition is already decided. There will be no more trade in Vinland. The slaughter is about to begin. The silence of the Vinland morning is shattered not by the call of a horn, but by the dull thud of dozens of feet. Thorvard and his warriors, driven by Freydis' fury, burst into the Icelanders' camp. Before us is not a fair fight, but a punitive operation where the enemy has not a single chance. Helgi, Finnbogi and their companions wake to rough yanks and ropes biting into their wrists. Sleepy, disoriented men are dragged out of the longhouse straight into the freezing cold. No one has time even to touch a sword hilt. They are lined up in a row. Freydis walks slowly in front of the line of captives. Cold calculation is frozen in her gaze. A short order sounds. Kill them! The massacre begins. Thorvard's warband, bound by an oath of loyalty and fear of their mistress, methodically deprives the prisoners of life. Helgi and Finnbogi, experienced mariners and honest merchants, meet their end not in glorious combat as befits Vikings, but like cattle in a slaughterhouse. Within a few minutes, 30 bodies lie still on the grass. But then, the well-oiled machine of murder malfunctions. Standing aside, huddled closely together, are 5 women. They had arrived across the ocean to maintain the household in the new colony. These unfortunates are not warriors. In Freydis' eyes, they are merely extra baggage. She turns to her men and points at them. Kill these too! And the incredible happens. Hardened fighters who have just slaughtered 30 men lower their axes. Even in their harsh world, there is a line that cannot be crossed. The massacre of unarmed women is not just a crime, it is nithing. A mortal disgrace that turns a warrior into an outcast, cursed by the gods. Thorvard averts his eyes. His companions shake their heads. No one dares to take such a sin upon their soul. Then Freydis realizes, if she wants to see the matter through to the end, she will have to act herself. She tears a battle axe from the hands of the nearest warrior. The saga of the Greenlanders conveys this moment with chilling brevity. "Hand me an axe!" she shouted. Erik the Red's daughter approaches the female captives. There is not a shadow of hesitation in her movements. One blow, a second, a third. Freydis personally and cold-bloodedly dispatches all 5. When the last victim falls, Freydis stands amidst the carnage, breathing heavily. But one will find neither horror nor a drop of remorse on her face. The saga preserved a frightening detail. She was left well pleased with how the morning had gone. She casts a glance over her men. They look at her no longer as a mistress, but as a monster. Primal fear can be read in their eyes. Freydis, wiping away the blood, utters a phrase that will become the seal on this crime. "If it is fated for us to return to Greenland, I will kill anyone who tells the truth. We will say that they simply stayed here." The death of the competitors was only the beginning. Freydis bound her companions with a collective guarantee of a terrible secret. Now they are not witnesses, but uncomplices. Vinland, which once seemed a land of hope, has turned into a mass grave. The brothers Gnar, loaded with Vinland timber and valuable furs, moors in the harbor of Brattahlid. On the stern, Freydis stands tall and proud. She returns not as a criminal, but as a victor. For Greenland, languishing from a resource deficit, this cargo promises unprecedented prosperity. Eiriksdottir generously gifts the crew, literally stuffing their mouths with gold and loud promises. A convenient legend is ready for everyone. Helgi and Finnbogi wished to remain across the ocean to found a permanent settlement there. For a brief moment, it seems the perfect crime has succeeded. Freydis bathes in luxury, reveling in the status of the richest woman in the colony. However, she overlooked the main trait of small communities bound by ice. Secrets do not live forever here. Fear of the harsh mistress gradually fades before mead and pangs of conscience. First, accidental slips of the tongue surface in the taverns. Following them come the frightened whispers of wives whose husbands scream in terror in their sleep. Rumors crawl along the fjords until they reach the only person before whom Freydis felt trepidation. Leif Erikson, now the High Chieftain of Greenland, learns. His sister docked on a foreign ship, and her comrades had vanished without a trace. The chieftain acts as a ruler, casting aside kinship feelings. He orders 3 sailors from his sister's crew to be taken into custody immediately. This is not an invitation for a chat. This is a full-blown arrest. In the gloomy dungeons of Brattahlid, the interrogation begins. The saga silence about the methods of inquiry, but the result is obvious. Under the weight of guilt and pressure, the captives break. The confession sounds gruesome. A night raid, bound men, and women whom Freydis personally finished off with an axe. When the truth is revealed, Leif Erikson experiences a profound shock. A dilemma rises before him capable of crushing one's will. The duty of a judge commands him to pass a death sentence for the massacre and the violation of the laws of hospitality. But before him is his own blood, his father's daughter. In Brattahlid, a gloom falls as Leif Erikson prepares for a more than tolerable decision. Leif convenes the Thing. The crowd thirsts for blood. The ruler arises before the assembly. He casts a glance at the culprit, but in his eyes, only icy contempt can be read. The sentence that falls from his lips will prove more agonizing than the executioner's block. "I do not have the heart to treat my sister as she deserves," Leif announces. "But I predict this for her and her kin. From now on, their descendants will never know success." By granting Freydis her life, her brother takes her future forever. Such words are not merely family anger. In the world of Vikings, where honor is valued above life, such a punishment means social death. The culprit is not executed or physically banished. She is turned into a living ghost. From now on, no one will risk doing business with the cursed clan. The family plunges into poverty and total alienation. The would-be queen of Vinland became a shadow wandering among people who would have preferred to see her dead. However, the echo of her axe carried far beyond the limits of a single family. The bloodbath in Vinland dealt the decisive blow that closed the path to the new world forever. The Greenlanders realized a bitter truth. Danger across the ocean lurks not only in the arrows of the Skrælings. The most ruthless enemy arrived there with them on the same ship. Trust crumbled to dust. Travelers no longer wished to risk it, fearing a stab in the back from their own comrades. The route to America, paved by Leif and mastered by Thorfinn, turned out to be flooded with blood and sealed with a curse. The Vikings left Vinland forever.
Freydis Eiriksdottir committed more than just a crime. With her axe, she severed the thin thread that connected 2 worlds. The saga of Vinland ends not with a triumphant anthem, but with a heavy silence. The Greenlanders abandoned the camp at Ansel Meadows. The longhouses erected by Leif and Thorfinn were left to rot under the rains of Newfoundland, turning into ghosts. Why did the most passionate nation in Europe, which conquered England, France, and Sicily, retreat before America? Historians have sought the solution for centuries, and today we know the answer. People were not driven by fear. They were ruled by cold mathematics. First, the demographic abyss. The Norsemen reached the New World too early. Behind them stood no resources of a powerful empire like Columbus or Cortez had. Greenland, their only base, numbered barely a couple of thousand inhabitants at best. They physically could not afford a war of attrition. The death of even 10 men in a skirmish with Skrælings became a catastrophe for the colony. Iron Age technologies capitulated before Stone Age numbers. Second, economic pragmatism. It is customary to consider Scandinavians romantics, but above all, they remained cynical entrepreneurs. Why die under Indian arrows for a farm in Vinland when white gold awaits in Greenland? Walrus ivory. The tusks of northern giants were valued in Europe higher than furs or timber. As long as the demand for ivory remained high, the risky colonization of America lacked economic sense. But does this mean their final departure? Such an opinion is mistaken. The Vikings did not forget the road across the ocean. They turned America into their secret storehouse. Chronicles have preserved an astounding fact. In 1347, 3.5 centuries after Leif and Freydis, Icelandic annals record the arrival of a Greenlandic ship blown off course by a storm. Where was it returning from? From Markland, from Labrador. Think about that. For almost 4 centuries, Greenlanders continued to sail to Canada. They went there not for conquest, but for timber, which was scarce on their harsh island. Vinland and Markland turned for them from a new world into an ordinary lumber yard. They visited the continent for centuries, but pragmatically refused to stay there overnight. However, the finale of this path was written not in America, but in Greenland itself. In the 15th century, the climate changed. The Little Ice Age fettered the seas in ice, cutting the settlers off from Europe. Concurrently, prices for walrus ivory collapsed due to the influx of elephant ivory from Africa. The last evidence of Norsemen in Greenland is a record of a wedding at Hvalsey Church in 1408. After that comes silence. When new ships docked at the shores years later, sailors found only empty walls and herds of feral sheep. The great western branch of Scandinavian culture dissolved into the cold fog, leaving descendants only sagas and ruins. Let us sum up. The saga of Vinland is not just a chronicle of discoveries, but a lesson in harsh realism. The story of Freydis and Leif proves to hold an entire continent, it is not enough to be a great warrior or navigator. One must have an economy behind one's back, capable of feeding this undertaking. A handful of brave souls pushed back the boundaries of the known, but in the end retreated, not to the ocean, but to the merciless logic of survival. The era of overseas voyages is complete, but the path of the Northmen continues. Where shall we steer our longships in the next season? The choice is yours. Do you wish to return to Scandinavia to see the birth of kingdoms and the path of Harald Fairhard? Or should we turn to the east to the riddle of the calling of the Varangians and the origins of the Rus? Or perhaps the sunny south beckons you, where the descendants of Vikings created the unique state of Sicily. Vote in the comments, Dynasty, Rus, or Sicily. Whose destiny will sound next? Subscribe and strike the bell like a shield before battle. See you in the Northern Sea.